Hello, and welcome to Real Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager. Pleased to have with me on the show today, Sarah Evans. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, no problem. Sarah's been on before, a good friend of mine, and we have a little bit of a random episode for you here today. It seems random at least, but this is Stranded on an Island movies. And you think, why did we do this? Well, the impetus for this was the first movie that Sarah will be introducing in a bit, which is The Wild Robot. But However, once I started thinking about it, there's like a lot of movies about people, usually people, sometimes robots, stranded on islands. And so we thought it'd be fun to review some of those today. We decided we purposefully didn't pick the most obvious ones that probably most of you who are watching the show have seen. Castaway with Tom Hanks talking to the soccer ball, or Lord of the Flies, or the one where Blue Lagoon, where the two young people run around naked. So we tried to pick a little less obvious um, stranded on an island movies and delve into maybe some ones you may not be as aware of. But go ahead, Sarah, and take it away with our first movie.
Yeah, well, I'm ready for this today. I got my island shirt on because
Oh,
I'm thinking
nice.
island today. So
Yes, very nice.
here we go. Yeah, the first one we're going to talk about is Wild Robot. And this movie just came out at the end of last month, and it's an animated film from DreamWorks. It's actually based on a book that has been pretty popular with young people in since it came out. But the topic is that after a shipwreck, an intelligent robot named Roz becomes stranded on an uninhabited island, and she has to like form some bonds and friendships with the animals there to figure out how to survive. Um, and like I said, this movie based on a book that's pretty popular, and I loved this movie. I'll just say that outright. The animation was beautiful, just really beautiful. So that was a definite high point. But I see why a lot of kids like the storyline. It's really cool. Like you've got a robot lands on an island and learns how to be wild. I mean, it's very different than your typical stranded on an island protagonist. I liked that the not only was the storyline interesting, but there was also some really nice lessons that I felt you could get out of it, especially for kids. Particularly around this idea that, as the robot kept saying, this is what I'm programmed to do. And then learning you don't have to be what you're programmed to be or do. I just thought that was a really cool lesson for kids and
Hmm.
definitely an enjoyable story all around. What'd you think?
Yeah, I loved it too. We saw this together with your little ones, or not so
Yeah.
little ones, they're getting
Yeah.
bigger.
Yeah.
But your youngest, Anders, had actually, read the books, and so that was actually great to have someone there who had seen the book, read the books, and was able to kind of say, oh, there's the differences with the movie or whatever. But it seemed like I was actually like thinking, oh, it'd be fun if he stepped on the show for a minute. But he seemed like he really liked the movie, which is always a good
Yeah.
sign. Like if you love the book and you also like the movie, there's a few little differences he noted, but overall he thought it was really faithful to it. You were right. The thing that really struck me was how beautiful the animation is. A lot of modern, especially digitally based, as opposed to hand drawn animation, to me often. You think about things like the Despicable Me movies or things like that. It often doesn't appeal to me. This one had a beautiful artistic palette, the use of the colors, almost sort of a watercolor effect in some scenes. Just some really gorgeous animation. They really, I think, kind of stepped up here, DreamWorks Animation on this, and just really took it to new places. So I loved that. At first, I was like, "Oh, is this going to be like their, like DreamWorks version of Wall-E?" Because you have this
Uh-huh.
like disregarded, broken robot, right? But it's
Yeah.
totally different than that. Although, I guess you could say the similarities of being the only robot around. But the way that Roz has to adapt to the animals on the island so that they're not they're scared they're also scared of her because she's something unfamiliar too. And I think there's a lesson there to be learned is like they have to learn to not be so scared of the unknown or be always in fear all the time. And then she has to learn to kind of deprogram herself and not be stuck in a rut and to do things to step outside of the box. And so there, yeah, like you said, there's good lessons in there, but it's not hammered over the head the way
Mhm.
some message movies for kids can be. So you can still just enjoy it like an adventure. And I loved all the voice work. And in fact, at the end of the movie, I didn't know there were so many celebrities like Catherine O'Hara and different people that had done the voices. The only one I knew about was Lupita Nyong, who is the central voice of Roz, and she does a great job, I think, voicing the character as well.
Yeah, I really actually was going to comment on that. Like, I feel like um, a lot of animated movies in recent years have really focused hard on who the voices are, almost in
Hmm.
such a way that you're like, oh, there's the Jack Black character, or there's
Yeah,
the,
right.
this guy. And this one, it wasn't putting that forward. It was just like there happened to be some famous people voicing it, but some of them I didn't even recognize
Yeah,
until the end when it told me. So I kind of like that because I feel like
yeah.
when it's focused hard on who's voicing it, it just sometimes can take away from the character on the
Sure, it
screen.
takes you out of the movie too. And one of my favorite characters in the movie was the beaver. Of course, I'd
Yeah.
like the fuddy duddy. He's like the fuddy duddy English guy.
Yeah.
He was one of my favorite voice actors in the movie, and he wasn't someone I was familiar with. So I thought the only one I recognized right away was Bill Nye, because he's so well known in English. His voice is very distinctive, but I didn't recognize Catherine O'Hara's voice and a bunch of the others. So I thought that was really cool, and I thought the voice acting was really well done. And there, I think there's also the cool thing that they get around with like the animals talking is that Roz has to search her database and like basically how learn basically to translate the different animals voices. So they're, of course, to us they're all speaking English because that's how they have to
Right.
translate it for kids and the regular
Yeah.
audiences. But there was some clever things around that, so it's not just your typical Disney talking animals in that way where they got around it. But yeah, I thought
Mhm.
it was a great message. I think it'll be interesting to see. I didn't know it was a series of books until Anders told us that, and so I will be really curious if they um, make more movies. I think it's been a pretty good hit, and so hopefully, maybe there will be a sequel. I did like that they wrapped it up in such a way it could go either way. Like I really hate the movies these days where they just automatically end on a cliffhanger because they're assuming there's going to be another one. I
Yeah.
sort of blame Lord of the Rings for that trend, to be honest, where they just like cut it like, oh, we know part two is coming and you got to watch the next 4 hours installment or
Yeah.
whatever. It's just like make it its own standalone movie, regardless. Give us a satisfying ending, and it did. So even if
Hmm.
they don't make another one, it's fine. So
Yeah. Yeah. We talked about that afterward too. Anders was hopeful for more, but we were also pleased with the way it wrapped up.
yeah, it could go either way. They wrapped
Yeah.
it. It was a good way to end it in a way that it could leave it open for another one or not.
Yeah.
Especially since I didn't know until talking to your kids that there was a whole series of books. I was like, oh yeah, they could keep doing these, but they could also leave it alone if it's a good fail safe too in case it wasn't a hit. But luckily, it's
Mhm.
doing pretty well at the box office, which makes me happy when a good kids movies because like we saw the trailers beforehand and I was just like, oh,
Ooh.
I don't think I could be a
Yeah.
parent because I don't think I could sit through all this. Oh my gosh, it's like that.
Yeah.
Every trailer was terrible.
They
It's
were
just like,
pretty bad.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
okay, well, definitely, yeah, 4 stars for me as well. I actually
Four
really enjoyed
stars.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
So,
Definitely recommend to adults
okay.
and kids.
Yes, yeah, it's great for both, I think. And I don't
Hmm.
think it's one that dumbs it down. Like, I think adults could. I mean, obviously I like animated movies, but like there's a certain kinds, like all those ones we saw
Hmm.
trailers to that I don't think I'd be able to tolerate. And this
Hmm.
one I sat through happily. So, um,
Nice.
okay, so we'll move on to our next movie, which is way different and probably not a
Yeah.
kids movie, but it's
Definitely not.
Swiss Army Man from 2016. And it's by the directors known as the Daniels, Daniel Scheinhardt and Daniel Kwan. Probably best known to all of you at home for directing the big breakout hit Everything Everywhere All at Once. But this is their first movie they did, which was not a big breakout hit, but did get some attention. It is about a man played by Paul Dano who is stranded on an island, and he befriends a corpse played by Daniel Radcliffe of Harry Potter fame that farts, talks, and eventually tries to help him get off the island. Yes, I mentioned the fart thing for a reason because it's actually a central aspect of the story. The corpse has a lot of flatulence, and he does it a lot throughout the movie. And in fact, it's one of the things that helps propel him in certain circumstances to actually save them. So yeah, it's an interesting movie. Did not see this when it came out. I was really on the fence about it. It got overall pretty good reviews, but enough mixed that I was kind of like, eh, and I just never saw it. And so for whatever reason, it wasn't a hit, but it was talked about a lot because it was unusual, and there were a lot of kudos given for Daniel Radcliffe's performance, which I really can't see now. It's for someone, I mean, he's not a big star I mean, he's a big star because of Harry Potter, but it's not like he's gone on to do like a bunch of huge movies. But any actor taking on the role of a corpse who farts, reading that and going, yeah, I'm going to sign up for that. That's pretty. So there's a reason he got a lot of kudos for it, and he's actually really, really good as a corpse because the
Mhm.
corpse isn't just he has a lot of moments, right? So and Paul Dano is playing. I hate to say it, but kind of the typical Paul Dano character. He often plays very kind of emo, depressed character. He loves this girl, but he can't express it. He had a repressive childhood. He doesn't have a good relationship with his father. So we've seen Paul Dano do these kind of movies before. So I you know, I don't think I didn't love this movie. I did find it interesting. I was able to like follow along with it, and I could relate with I think anyone who's ever suffered from like depression or loneliness could really relate with it because that's really ultimately what the movie is really about. This character is very depressed and lonely and feeling kind of hopeless. Right at the beginning, he tries to kill himself on the island, and whether or not it's an island, I'm not going to get into that because I don't want to do spoilers, but this you could say this is technically not or is in Stranded on an Island movies, but for the sake of the fact that he believes he's on an island, we will go with that. But I really struggled with this movie. I felt, despite it was only like 90 minutes, it actually felt a little long in times. I'm curious to hear what you thought about it, Sarah.
I really didn't like this movie.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah.
interesting.
Um, that
Was it
last
all the
comment you
farting that got to you?
ugh, yeah, that definitely was not a good start for me. Um, and like your last comment, yeah, it felt really long to me, even though it wasn't, which is not a good sign.
Yeah.
There were definitely parts where I was kind of like checking my watch, how much more we got to go here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I appreciate what you said about the kind of portrayal of what it's like to be lonely and feel like you can't connect with people. And they did take that in a very interesting direction that I had not seen done. But that was very touching.
Yeah.
But I just couldn't get over the weirdness around the corpse. It just everything. It you kept discovering things that the corpse was doing to help him, and every time it felt like this weird slapsticky type thing that just didn't feel right to me. I it made I didn't know before watching it that it was the same directors from Everything Everywhere All at Once, and that makes sense to me now because they take a lot of there's a lot of interesting risk taking and different
Mm-hmm.
types of storytelling. But that movie's just I don't know, I like that one a lot better. So
Well, that one
this one
also
was
mixes genres
odd.
and styles, like you said. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of slapstick in this movie, and the whole movie is essentially until the kind of basically very end, just the two guys. And so you have to, and I think that's maybe one of the problems is that the Daniel Radcliffe character, to me at least, the corpse is more likable. Paul Dano's character is so mopey, and I get it. Of course he's mopey, he's depressed and suicidal, but um, it's hard to spend a lot of time with his character, and I think that's one of the reasons it feels really long, and it also feels like they had to stretch it out to even get to 90 minutes because there's only so much you can do with a corpse, you know farting around on an island. And there's also this weirdness that the Paul Dano's character, one of the reasons he's really depressed is he's in love with this girl that he could never even talk to, and it's kind of creepy, like he's got photos of her all over his phone, and then she kind of comes into play at the end, and then that actually makes it more creepy because we
Yes.
find out like she doesn't even know he exists, and she's married and has a whole life, and so like he's been sort of semi stalking her. So then it made it
Mhm.
even harder again to feel sympathy for him. So yeah, there was just a lot of things I didn't love about the movie. despite the fact that I actually related with it in some ways, which is also, I mean, minus the farting, but but the, you know, I think a lot of people can relate with depression and loneliness, and so I thought that was an interesting take on it. So I
Hmm.
think it was a good first movie in that they kind of figured out their style, and that's why Everything Everywhere All at Once, because I appreciate the blending of styles. It works much better in that movie than it does in this one, I think. So
Yeah. I will say I do agree though that Daniel Radcliffe's performance was really well done. Um,
yeah.
what an odd mix of things to have to portray in one character, and I did think he did a great job.
Yeah, it
But
showed.
yeah,
Yeah, it gave him a
well,
chance to stretch his acting muscles. So, yeah.
it did. But yeah, I would not recommend this film to anybody. 'Cause
No.
I think in the first 5 minutes they'd be like, "What the?"
Well, unless you like really, really, you're really into bizarre movies, and there, you know, it got some pretty
Yeah,
good reviews, and there are people, and I'm usually into really bizarre movies, but I was bored through a lot of the middle of it, and that's not a
me
good sign
too.
for a 90-minute movie. So,
Yeah.
okay, so we'll move on. The next film I've got, Castaway on the Moon. This is one that I picked from 2009, partially because I hadn't heard of it. It's a South Korean film, and it is about a man who, it's actually got some similarities to almost all the
Does.
films. A failed suicide attempt. He tries to kill himself. He jumps off the bridge, and he ends up on an island instead, swimming up, washing up on an island. That's now, here's where the difference is. The island is right next to the big city. I mean, he can literally see the city. It's like this kind of wildlife refuge. You know, for people in the Salem, if you think of like the Ankeny Wildlife Refuge, it's like if you were there, but you couldn't get to Salem, you just see it in the distance. And so,
Yeah.
but it's like he's on this little island that's kind of like a nature preserve off of Seoul, Korea, right? And then and first, when he first get there, you know, because he was suicidal, he's just like trying to get off the island, and then eventually he's like, well, you know, I'm going to stay here. He starts to enjoy it. Then he starts a connection with this woman who is back in the city but has a telescope. She is essentially agoraphobic. She's like, you know, in her bedroom all day, never leaves her house, and has become this shut in. And she starts to develop a relationship with him looking at his telescope. They start to send each other messages by throwing bottles with little notes back and forth from the island into the city. It sounds a little ridiculous, but I actually really liked this movie. I thought it went some unexpected places. I really liked and again, this one I felt like dealt with the suicide and depression much better because you had two characters. Number one, the woman that are totally different. Like she's a technology shut in. She just sits on her computer all day and she doesn't leave her room. And then he's out on this island and they
Mhm.
learn from each other and develop this friendship. And I found it, and it's very funny in parts, but it's mostly a drama. And I really liked it, and I loved the look of it. I'm curious to hear what you thought.
Yeah, I loved this movie.
Oh yeah.
And I actually just randomly my kids watched it with me because like it was not rated like R or anything and I had to watch it and they were around and they got sucked in and they loved this movie.
Oh, that's awesome.
I know. They were like talking about how great it was. Yeah, I think that of all the castaway on an island, stranded on an island movies I've seen, I felt like this one won for oddest version of that because he's stranded on an island in the middle of the city.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but like yeah, I just really the humor in this one was subtle and nice, like where you just kind of were like, that's so weird but funny. Um, and yeah, you really much like the Tom Hanks Castaway, you really started like rooting for this guy, like as he's figuring out how to make a living there, and he even kind of forms a friendship with a scarecrow he makes. Like
Yeah.
I saw some similarities there, but like yeah, just the similarities between the guy on the island and the woman in her own island of her room were just fascinating to explore on a psychological level, just how they could be very similar. Um,
And I
and
thought
the
she
way they
was
were
great.
both,
She
yeah,
gets a lot of screen time, which I like.
yeah, and they had both retreated from society, but in very different ways because they just didn't feel right there. Um, it was really good. Like the last movie we talked about, quirky in a lot of ways, but in my opinion, done much better.
Oh yeah, way
Not like
better.
over the top slapsticky quirky, just more like just interesting story, where you really felt connected more to both characters and it pulled you in. So loved it.
Yeah, I loved it too. It has a great look too. I thought it was, and both the lead actors just really draw you in, and you want the best for them ultimately. Yeah, and you don't know exactly how she got to where she was in her situation a little bit. We know that she had something happen to her, but yeah, I just really loved this one. This was a huge discovery. So it's a
Yeah.
little bit hard to find, but you can find it on demand or on. It's actually free on services like Tubi or Roku TV. So I recommend checking it out for sure. It's probably one
Highly
of my
recommend
favorites.
also. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally loved it. All
Okay,
right,
so
last
next one is
movie.
you.
Yeah, so this is the 1960 version of Swiss Family Robinson, made by Disney. And I chose this one because I remember when I was a kid, we owned a bunch of VHS tapes of a bunch of these live action Disney films from that era. And I used to watch this one all the time when I was a kid, and I loved it, but I had not seen it since I was a kid. So I chose this. I was like, oh, I want to watch it again. I wonder how it held up. The answer, badly. So badly that it's on Disney Plus, but they put like a little warning at the, or not a warning, a disclaimer at the beginning, like saying how portrayals of people were different back then, and it was not okay then, and it's not okay now. Like, and really,
I.e., this movie is racist as heck and tortures animals. That's
yeah,
Disney's way of saying that anyway.
yeah. All of my kids watch this with me too. I let them watch it with me,
It's a
and
good
also
discussion
make,
piece.
but made sure that they saw the disclaimer, and we talked about that first. Um, but yes, it doesn't hold up on the like the bad pirates of the movie are very racist portrayals of particularly Asian people. And there's also so much wrong with what they're doing with animals in this film where I'm like, what did they like not okay? Like just the capturing of animals, the treatment of animals, and they were
Yeah.
using real animals filming. So like I don't know how that whole thing went when they're how were they working with a baby elephant? I don't know, but um the what bothered me even more than all that though, not surprising, was the rampant like sexism that
Hmm.
the women are just there to be weak and save me, and I must rely on you men to keep me alive and get me out of here. Oh God, it was so tiring. Like,
Yeah.
oh, please stop with that. And even my boys were like, geez, they were like, I've seen more racist things than this, which is sad.
Yeah.
And they were really bothered by the woman thing. Like, oh my God, roll my eyes.
Right. The women have like nothing to do in the movie, and particularly the
No,
girl they capture who's like pretending she's a boy at the beginning, which of course just means she has a hat on. Apparently, if you just put a hat over your hair,
cut your hair and put a hat on
instantly
and
a
you're a
boy.
boy. Yeah.
Yeah, she was doing that to protect herself from the pirates so they wouldn't assault her, I'm assuming. And then when she takes her, hat off, they're like, oh, and all of a sudden they're like, being nicer to her, but also then all of a sudden she's like, I can't run. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, so when they're trying to run from the pirates and stuff. So I didn't, yeah, when I was watching it, I was like, oh boy, Sarah's going to have one of those moments, which we've all had when we watch things that we watched when we were younger and we're like, well, this has not aged well. And I watch a lot of old movies, and I also am good at putting movies into context. There's a lot of racism in movies. I mean, and I wouldn't even say just old movies. You could go back just like 15 years and find that.
Yeah.
And but and to a certain degree, I can overlook that if the movie is like really awesome, or not overlook, but put it into that context and still recommend it on other levels. My thing with this movie is it felt really long. I actually was quite bored for a lot of it. It kind of just and none of the characters, I really had a hard time getting into any of the characters, and I have to, the two older boys are fine. At least they didn't annoy me. But Kevin Corcoran, who plays Francis, the youngest child, I was seriously like halfway through this film. I'm like, please, that tiger, please eat that kid. Please, for the love of all that's holy, someone, some animal, eat that child, some pirate, steal him, make him disappear from this movie. And he was a well known child actor. He was in a lot of stuff that days. I have to say,
He
that is something,
was?
yeah,
I didn't know that.
that is
He was
something that
so
has gotten
bad.
better in modern movies. Is like there was a big thing in especially movies in the 50s and 60s where kids were like overacted and did this like thing where they like talked always at the highest pitch voice possible,
Oh
and
yeah.
but he's the one that's constantly like, as soon as they get on the island, he's immediately gets into trouble with like an elephant and the tiger, and they constantly have to save that kid. He has like, and he talks at this like high pitched voice that was just like, man, if you have never had kids or you're thinking of having kids, if you watch this movie, it will make you never want to have children. Because I was just sitting there like, please, some animal eat this child. Like I was just
That
like,
is
I cannot
hilarious.
handle it anymore.
Oh, that's hilarious because we had the same reaction. Like he was so annoying. First of all, he
Oh,
made the stupidest choices the whole way, but the acting was so bad. We kept for days after watching that film, my kids and I kept making fun of that kid. I feel
oh,
bad, but
good.
like he would say things in such a weird way that we would
No, yeah. And
like
luckily,
mimic
no
it.
kids are really as annoying as that kid. So that's why I
No,
feel okay saying like someone,
it
because
was
he's just playing like the worst version of a child
poorly
that's ever
written
existed.
character and
Yeah.
then poorly acted on top of
Oh
that.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
that was
have to
rough.
mention one little historical piece about this movie. I always like to bring up how evil Disney is that there's actually an
Oh,
earlier version of Swiss Family Robinson that was made in the 40s, not a Disney movie. It was actually done by RKO and has a uncredited voiceover narration by Orson Welles of all people. And I would love to watch the 1940 version, but Disney, when the 60s, when they decided to remake it, they scooped up all the rights to it and destroyed all known prints of it. It is available in some places, probably, but it's really hard to find because of
oh,
that. So it's
wow.
there
That's
were a few.
awful.
Yeah, the way it was described online is there were a few survivors to the cinematic Holocaust. So the film survives today, much to the relief of film historians and preservationists. But they did their best to make sure no one could see it, so it wouldn't compete with their version. Which, so just need to bring up again,
Wow.
Disney, the big
Thanks.
bad monster. So if you try to watch the
Yeah.
1940 version, it is out there, but it's very hard to find. So
So, oh,
um,
that's really fascinating and I guess
yeah,
not surprising. I
not
did want
surprising.
to put in like a a positive thing about the movie, I guess. I don't know what to say, how to label it, but I reflected on why I loved the movie as a kid,
Yeah,
and those things are all still true. Like if we ignore all the negative things we just said,
yeah, yeah.
it's a fun adventure where they have to figure out how to be on an island. They build the coolest house ever in
The
the
tree house is
trees.
very cool.
That was one of my favorite memories of it as a kid. I wanted to live in that cool tree house.
Yeah,
They get to play with all these exotic wild animals. Like
yeah.
that's super fun. And then they do this whole like Home Alone style thing where they set up all these traps for the pirates. And like you get to watch the pirates, go through. Like those are
All of it. Yeah,
elements of a
yeah,
movie that a kid loves, right?
yeah,
Like I
yeah.
I get why I loved it.
That's why it was such a big hit and why, kids
Yeah.
loved it. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah,
I'm
and
glad you pointed that out because it's
yeah,
obviously we were dwelling on the negative as adults, but there was a
right.
reason in 1960 it was a big hit, right?
Yeah, and my kids loved those same elements that I remember liking
Yeah.
as a kid. Once
I just
we
wanted when the pirates fell down that hill, I just wanted the kid to go with them. Sorry, Francis. Just
him
get
and
out
that
of here, please.
tiger. Oh my God. Yes, please. Let the
Yes,
tiger eat him.
exactly. Okay, well, we're out of time, Sarah, but it was so awesome to
Yeah.
have you on the show and
Yeah.
get to talk about these movies. I would say for me, the two big picks were probably Wild Robot and Castaway on the Moon because those were just the best movies. Those are both 4-star movies, so I recommend people seek those out.
I would totally agree with that, especially like you said, Castaway on the Moon. I'd never heard of it. Not really a big one out there. Surprise, like amazing. I
Yeah,
would agree. And I would not recommend Swiss Army Man personally. Swiss Family Robinson only recommended with a ton of caveats and explanations to the kids about why the portrayals are not okay.
right, right. And who knows, maybe one of these days we'll get to watch the 1940 version if we can find it out there. It may not be very
Maybe.
good either, but who knows? But
Eh.
as long as that kid's a little bit less annoying, I could probably sit through anything. Because after that movie was over, I was like, I need a drink. After that kid, listening to that kid yelp for 2 hours. Anyway, it was
Oh
great to have
man.
you on, Sarah. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank
As
you.
always, we're on realfilmsnobs.com or subscribe to us on YouTube. Have a great day and great movies. Thank you.